There is a small group of islands sitting in the Bay of Bengal, far from any major city, far from any news cycle, far from the world most of us know. The islands are covered in thick tropical forest. Coral reefs circle them in clear water. And somewhere inside those forests, right now, people are living exactly as their ancestors lived tens of thousands of years ago. Hunting with bows, gathering honey from the trees, sleeping under the open sky, speaking languages so ancient that they share no known relationship with any other language on earth. For generations, the outside world told one story about these people, a story of primitive isolation, of a people cut off, left behind, frozen at the dawn of human history while the rest of the world moved forward. Scientists called them relics, explorers called them savages. And in every version of that story, the Andaman Islanders were defined by one thing: their separation from the rest of us. But then came the DNA. And the DNA told a completely different story. Not isolation, not people left behind, a story of a journey. The longest forgotten human journey in history. A journey that began in Africa more than 60,000 years ago, moved along coastlines that no longer exist, and ended on islands that a rising ocean eventually surrounded and sealed from the world. The isolation was real, but it was never the beginning. It was what happened after an extraordinary migration that most people have never heard of. And when scientists finally decoded the DNA of the Andaman Islanders, they did not find primitives frozen in time. They found the oldest surviving genetic record of humanity's first great walk across Asia. And buried inside that DNA, they found echoes of a human species with no name, no bones, no fossil record. A species we did not know existed until we found it hiding in the genes of people living on islands in the Indian Ocean. This is the story of the Andaman Islanders. And it is not the story you have been told. The Andaman Islands are an archipelago of roughly 200 to 500 islands in the northeastern Indian Ocean. Today, they are Indian territory, but geographically they sit far closer to Southeast Asia than to India itself. Myanmar lies to the northeast. The islands are blanketed in tropical forest, ringed by coral, and home to some of the most biodiverse ecosystems in all of South and Southeast Asia. 4 indigenous groups have lived on these islands since before any written record. Each group has a different story. Some were destroyed by contact with the outside world. Some resisted it. One has refused it entirely for as long as anyone can remember. The first group is the Great Andamanese. When British colonizers arrived in 1858, there were more than 5,000 Great Andamanese living across the islands in 10 distinct tribes. Each tribe had its own language, its own territory, its own name. Today, fewer than 60 Great Andamanese survive. Their language is what scholars call an isolate. It has no known relationship with any other language family on Earth. Not with any Indian language, not with any Southeast Asian language, not with anything spoken anywhere by anyone. The last known fluent speaker, a woman named Boa Senior, died in 2010. When she died, a language that had evolved in complete isolation for potentially tens of thousands of years died with her. No one who has ever lived on Earth can speak it anymore. The second group is the Jarawa. They live in the dense forests of South and Middle Andaman. Their population today stands between 380 and 500 individuals. For most of the colonial period, the Jarawa were aggressively hostile to any outsider who approached. Then, in the late 1990s, peaceful contact was established. What researchers found was not what they expected. A doctor who visited them in 1998 described them as in exceptionally good health. Better than any tribal community on the Indian mainland, obesity did not exist. Hypertension did not exist. Heart disease was unknown. These were people who had lived without processed food, without alcohol, without the 1,000 chemicals of industrial life. The Jarawa also carry one of the most sophisticated systems of ecological knowledge ever documented among any hunter-gatherer people. Knowledge of more than 150 plant species and 350 animal species, specific leaves to treat fever, plants to stop bleeding, the betel leaf to kill pain. All of it built over tens of thousands of years, passed from parent to child, never written, living only in human memory. The third group is the Onge. They live on Little Andaman Island. At the turn of the 20th century, their population was close to 700. Today, there are approximately 100. The Indian government moved them into settlements in a policy intended to help, but which disconnected them from the land and sea their entire culture depended on. The decline has not stopped. The fourth group is the Sentinelese. They live on North Sentinel Island alone in the Andaman Sea, and they are among the most famous uncontacted people on Earth. The Indian government estimated as few as 15 individuals based on aerial observation, though the Sentinelese were shooting arrows at the helicopter conducting that observation, so the actual number may be higher. The Sentinelese have rejected every attempt at contact for as long as any record exists. In 2018, an American missionary named John Allen Chow paid fishermen to bring him close to the island. He believed he could introduce them to Christianity. He went ashore. He was killed. The Indian government did not send anyone to retrieve his body. Indian law forbids outsiders from approaching North Sentinel Island, and that law exists to protect the Sentinelese. 2 days after the catastrophic Indian Ocean tsunami of December 2004, a Coast Guard helicopter flew over North Sentinel Island. A lone Sentinelese man stood on the beach, raised his bow, and shot an arrow toward the aircraft. He was alive. His people had survived, and the answer had not changed. All 4 Andamanese groups survived that tsunami without significant casualties. The earthquake had its epicenter closest to their homelands. 230,000 people died across the wider region, but the Andamanese retreated into forests and to higher ground before the waves arrived. Scientists believe they read environmental signals no satellite could match. Changes in the behavior of birds, the unusual drawing back of the sea, knowledge built across thousands of years of living close to the earth. Now, we come to what the outside world did when it arrived in force. For centuries, outsiders had been passing near the Andaman Islands and recording what they saw. Almost none of it was accurate. Ptolemy described the islands in the 2nd century and advised travelers to avoid them. Marco Polo wrote that the inhabitants had heads like dogs. Arthur Conan Doyle used an Andamanese islander as a murderous villain in a Sherlock Holmes story, describing him as tiny, toxic, and barely human. None of these men had been there. All were working from the same colonial mythology. The British arrived in force in 1858. They chose the Andaman Islands for a penal colony because the remoteness made escape nearly impossible. Between 1858 and 1939, approximately 83,000 Indian and Burmese convicts were transported here, making the Andaman Islands the largest penal colony in the entire British Empire. They built the cellular jail in Port Blair, completed in 1906, 7 wings radiating from a central tower, designed so prisoners could never see one another. Indian independence activists were imprisoned there under brutal conditions. The local name was Kalapani, black water. While the British were building their prison, the indigenous Andamanese were dying. In the 1860s, the British established what they called the Andaman Home, a place where captured islanders were brought and held. None of the more than 150 infants born at that home survived beyond 2 years of age. Not one. Every child born there died there. In 1868, pneumonia swept through. In 1877, a measles epidemic killed an estimated 50% of the entire Andamanese population. Not 50% of one tribe. 50% of all of them combined. Syphilis followed. Then, influenza. In less than 40 years of contact, introduced disease wiped out perhaps 4/5 of the original Andamanese population. By 1875, a British observer wrote that the Andamanese were already perilously close to extinction. The first census in 1901 counted approximately 625 Great Andamanese, 15% of their population 40 years earlier. They did not go without resistance. They defended their territories the way any people defend their home. But they were defending forests against a colonial power with guns and an empire behind it. And when the bullets did not kill them, the diseases did. Now we come to the part of this story that rewrites everything that came before it. The first major genetic studies of the Andamanese began in the early 2000s. Scientists analyzed mitochondrial DNA passed only through the mother, and Y chromosome DNA passed only through the father. And what they found changed the entire understanding of who these people are. The first discovery overturned more than a century of assumption. For over 150 years, researchers had looked at the dark skin and small stature of the Andamanese and concluded they must be descended from African populations. They used the term negrito, meaning little black people, as if appearance told the whole story of ancestry. Almost all of it was wrong. The DNA said no. The Andamanese mitochondrial DNA belongs to a lineage called haplogroup M. That lineage is not African. It is the most common maternal lineage across all of Asia. It exists in India, East Asia, New Guinea, and Australia. It is the genetic signature of the people who left Africa and spread east across the Asian continent. The resemblance to African populations was not shared ancestry. It was convergent evolution. Two populations in similar environments developing similar physical traits through entirely separate evolutionary paths. The Andamanese look similar to some Africans the way dolphins look similar to sharks, not because they are related, because similar pressures shape them. The Andamanese are not Africans who got lost. They are Asians, among the oldest Asians on Earth. The second discovery was about time. The specific Andamanese lineage called M2 traces back to a common ancestor approximately 63,000 years ago, at exactly the moment when modern humans were leaving Africa and beginning their journey eastward across Asia. This connected them to what geneticists call the southern coastal migration. The theory that early humans leaving Africa went east along coastlines through South Asia and into Southeast Asia, eventually reaching Australia and the Pacific. The coastline they walked is now entirely underwater. When the last ice age ended, sea levels rose by over 130 meters. The beaches those ancient humans walked are now beneath the ocean floor. The Andaman Islands were settled around 26,000 years ago during the last glacial maximum, when sea levels were at their lowest and the gap between the islands and the Asian mainland was far smaller than today. People reached the islands when crossing was still possible. Then the ice melted. The sea rose. The gap widened. The people inside were sealed in, not by choice, by the slow movement of the Earth's climate over thousands of years. The third discovery connected the Andaman Islands to Japan. The Y chromosomes of Onge and Jarawa men carry haplogroup D, one of the oldest surviving male lineages in all of Asia. This same marker appears in Tibetans and in the Japanese. Andamanese men and Japanese men share a common male ancestor. A man who lived before farming, before cities, when humans were still hunters on an open continent. Almost everywhere, that ancient lineage was replaced as farming populations spread across Asia. But in the Andamans, because of the ocean, and in Japan, it survived. A living thread connecting two peoples on opposite ends of Asia. The fourth and most astonishing discovery came in 2016 and was confirmed again in 2019. Researchers sequenced the complete genomes of Andamanese individuals and found something they could not explain. The Andamanese genome contained DNA that matched no known human group. Not Neanderthal, though The Andamanese carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal ancestry like all non-African people. Not Denisovan, the archaic species identified from bones found in a Siberian cave. Something else entirely. Something that had diverged from the main human lineage roughly 300,000 to 600,000 years ago. A population that had interbred with the ancestors of the Andamanese somewhere during their ancient migration through Asia. Scientists call it extinct hominin 1. Andaman Islanders carry between 2.6 and 3.4% of their genetic profile from this unknown population, a population genetically equidistant between Neanderthals and Denisovans, but neither one. No bones of this species have ever been found, no teeth, no cave, no burial. We know it existed only because its trace survived inside the DNA of people who are alive right now on islands in the Indian Ocean. The only record this species ever left behind is inside the Andaman Islanders. Now step back and see the full picture. 60,000 years ago, a group of modern humans leaves Africa. They move east along coastlines that will one day be ocean floor. Along the way, they encounter ancient human populations whose bones will never be found, carrying those traces in their genes. Around 26,000 years ago, some of them reach a chain of islands when the sea is still low enough to cross. Then, the ice melts. The sea rises. The people inside are sealed in. For the next 15,000 years, they live in those islands. Their bodies adapt to island life. Their stature decreases through natural selection. Their languages evolve in total isolation until they share no recognizable connection with any other tongue on Earth. Their knowledge of the forest and the sea deepens with every generation. They build no cities. They write no books. But they build something else. A continuous living chain from that first ancient migration to the present day. And when the outside world arrives, it does not see any of this. It sees people with bows and calls them Stone Age. It brings diseases that kill half of them in one epidemic. It builds prisons on their islands. It writes novels where they are the villain. But the DNA sees something completely different. The DNA sees the oldest surviving record of humanity's first journey through Asia. It sees a Y chromosome that links Andamanese hunters to the people of Japan. It sees a maternal lineage 63,000 years old, tracing the path of the first humans to walk the Asian coast. It sees the echo of a nameless species surviving only in the genes of people the outside world called primitive. The Andaman Islanders were never isolated from human history. They were carrying it, all of it, in every cell of their bodies. The world spent 200 years looking at them and seeing the beginning. People frozen at the start, not yet arrived, but that was never what they were. They were the continuation of the longest unbroken human journey outside Africa. They went first. They walked the coast that is now an ocean floor, and they are still here. The DNA did not reveal that they were isolated. It revealed they were never alone. They were carrying the memory of all of us.